He brings out some Jordan Peterson. He brings out some Joe Rogan, like this really interesting guy. Really... So she's thinking all in the back of her head, how am I going to talk about this guy to my girlfriends?
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
G'day, Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. I have a Suntory 196 in my hand. The week's at a close. The kids are in bed. And, I've got my hair growth serum in my head, so I'm doing good.
So do you know what I've got in my... hang on, I'm about to open.
Oh, that was obnoxiously loud.
I'll put it up to the camera, but you'll have to verbalize this for our listeners at home.
Heaps normal. Too good to be wasted. Quiet XPA. What does it say? Less than 0.5% alcohol.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Do you just wanted the taste to that? So
I haven't had an alcoholic beverage since before Christmas.
Why?
And I found that this is sort of gives me, I'm not going to lie, not like 100% of the experience, but at least in terms of, I don't know, maybe like the part of the experience that's like ritual, like there's a ritual about it. It sort of fulfills that side of it. And taste-wise, it's actually okay.
It kind of puts you in a relaxed mindset. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's obviously not the alcohol because there is none, but like it's for whatever part of the brain has associations with drinking and certain things that you do. Like we were talking recently around music, like how listening to alcohol. Are
you sure there's not alcohol in there?
Drinking alcohol and listening to music makes it better. And it's actually the association of like finishing a day of work, particularly when I've been working from home, because like it's not really like the kind of drink you'd go and order at a bar, but like you're ready to relax. Okay, now I'm going to crack open a beer. Like this kind of does it. Like this gives that vibe, and then you can I'll listen to some tunes or whatever. So we'll see how long it lasts, but I thought I'd give it a go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that they have their place. I kind of relate it to, I suppose, decaf coffee. Like sometimes I'll sit down and I'll have a decaf coffee and then I'll start to experience some of the effects that I associate with the caffeine. Like my thoughts will start to arise a little bit quicker. I'll start to become a little bit more energetic. And sometimes I think, have they actually given me just a normal coffee and passed it off as a decaf? And I wonder how many times that happens.
But some part of it must be like a placebo effect. Like it's not 100%. It's like the Coke test, like the Pepsi challenge or whatever, like where knowing that's come from a red Coca-Cola can makes it taste better.
Well, anyway, all right, so I want to actually run something by you. This person's going to remain anonymous for their own protection online, but the other night they admitted to me that when they listen to rap music alone in their car and they're singing along to the words, that they will use the N-word. And we had a bit of a discussion about this. And something that is quite an interesting question around, like, those are the words of the song. And if you love the song and you want to sing them, it just does kind of seem a little bit strange, like getting to that part of the lyrics and then pausing when no one else is in the car and you're doing it because you love the song. So it kind of raised a bit of an interesting question to me, and it made me think about my own attitudes towards it. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
All right. So to me, this is a really easy one. If you're on your own and you're verbalizing it, you have that's the equivalent of like cabinating confidence. Like it is what it is. Like it's your personal, it's like your inner thoughts. Like you can do what the fuck you like. You can even like probably use it in like any capacity if you're on your own and no one else can hear it, as long as you don't tell anyone, right? Now this person's broken the fourth wall and told you that that's what they do. You can almost frame that as like a person told me that when they're thinking to themselves and they're like, they sometimes like mentally verbalize it in a, as we have our inner voice, right? and as though that's something controversial. So for me, like, I'm not sure there's that much difference between the two. Now, of course, there might be something like, well, you're revealing about yourself that you've done this thing, but like maybe to sharpen the distinction, like if you want me to put on a scale out of 10, verbalizing it in front of other people versus verbalizing it in your inner voice, one is like exponentially worse.
This is good. This is exactly what I wanted you to say, because I think the same way. But now if I follow that up with a poignant question of whether, and now it's a bit hard because I know you don't appreciate hip hop or rap music, but would you do it?
Would I do it? Well, maybe that if I don't take, like, let's say not that word, but other words in the English language in other music that I do listen to, and those words I wouldn't say, or that might equally be taboo, or, you know, not necessarily taboo, but like, you know, they're just not, it's just not in my character to say it, right? Then, and there are words like that. So, and if they're in a song, there are songs where that would be the case, where there would be words in that I would verbalize, and even though I think the words are abhorrent, right?
That word. I'm talking about that word.
Look, I'm not precious, right? Just as a matter of principle, like, I just think generally I understand the offense and baggage of that word and that it is truly an offensive word. I get all of that. But I'm a pretty sort of straight up and down sort of person. Like, I think if we're in a world where there's taboo words such that, like, you know, you unleash the devil if you say certain words, like, I don't believe in that shit. I just think generally they're just words. Now, I get it. They're words that offend people, but should we really be worrying about people saying it in the car? I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. But would I say it? Yeah, probably I would.
Yes, gotcha. Cancel. No. It's an interesting one, right? Because I go down the same line as you. Like, you are in the car. There's no different from your own internal monologue and all the things are your thoughts that you probably can't control. But at the same time, when I do love hip hop, I've always loved hip hop and rap music. And you know what? I don't say the word, and it's really annoying because some of the artists that I listen to, every third word is the N word, right? And so I actually don't say it when I'm like, if I'm singing along, not that I'm always singing along, but if I do, I don't say the word, or I change the word from the N word to, I sub in brother instead of N word, because it kind of fits in the same onomatopoeia of it.
But okay, what about your whole life that you've liked this music? Like, is that always been the case?
You know what? Like, I think that I've understood. So I think when I was younger, I definitely, like, when I was singing along in private, I might have, like, said the word. Because, you know, I wanted to sing the words, right? And some of it's like pretty, like, if you're listening to old school rap, you know, it's very much part of the lyrics, right? Like, it's part of what sounds good. It's the best part of the song sometimes. It just makes it sound cool. It's the slang, it's the vernacular. So yeah, I have when I was much younger, but I find now that since I've been an adult, let's say, it's weird, and I feel like it's pushing against in some way, in a perverse way, it's pushing against my principles, but I don't feel comfortable saying it, even when I'm alone in the car. I like something about my mind's like, hey, like, this is not the right place to take a stand, or you know, that word's not for me, kind of thing. And like, actually, a lot of the power about these artists flaunting this word is because of that. Like, no one else can say it. It's like, it's their word now, right? And somehow that seems like a fitting kind of cosmic outcome for how it's been used in the past. But yeah, it does clash against my sensibilities, but I actually don't feel comfortable saying it. And I don't say that word. I use the word brother, or I just don't say it.
I think the notion, like, okay, even the concept of the N word, like, is a relatively new phenomenon, like, in terms of this idea that you can't say it in any circumstance. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, there's those high profile examples of people who've said it in meetings to refer it in a meta sense, you know, like the famous examples where they're not using it in the derogatory sense. They're just saying, like, we should not use this word, how terrible this word is, but then they actually say the word, but like, they clearly mean it. Like, they're clearly allies of the cause, right? But they just haven't learnt the new rule that you're not supposed to say it. I don't really kind of like that, if I'm honest. Like, I think there shouldn't be taboo words. Like, that's almost like a very religious sort of connotation. Like, it's a sin. Like you shouldn't say the Lord's name in vain, kind of thing. Like, I actually don't like that. Like, that to me seems like a regressive move. You know, we've really got to hold you to account. And usually the kind of people who it's a game that, like, elites play amongst each other.
This is not one of those times though where white people or coastal elites are being precious about a word. Like, this is actual black people taking offense to you using the N-word.
I don't mean that. Like, obviously, like, it's an offensive word, but like, and it's a different word to other words. But like, the reason why 20 years ago it would have been acceptable in a meeting talking about the horrid use of this horrible word and then actually verbalizing that word, the fact that 20 years ago that would have been okay, and the fact that today it's not okay, and, you know, I don't know if that's the right time horizon, right? But like, that's a new phenomenon. That's not like some new revelation that this is a bad word or whatever. Because this is what's going to happen with every other word of that. Like, it's going to move in that direction, right? This notion of being like sensitive to spoken syllables out of the mouth, right? Where you're talking about something in a meta sense, right? With good intentions. That's religious. That's like borderline the same as like religion, right? And we've moved away from that.
Yeah, I get it. There's not many words that I associate to it, but it's not like also the intent. Because like I said, in this scenario, the intent of singing the song is like, there's no malice behind it. But it's like that word is not for you anymore. It's been, they've reclaimed it and it's not for you. And that's part of the power of it, right? And I think that that's the thing, right? Like, I think that it's not that the reason you can't say the N-word even when appreciating rap music is that you're not part of the culture, and it's not for you.
So just to be clear, I think there's a difference between, like, in the context of like a rap song, right, where you can't say it, you can't sing it. Like if you were doing like a cover version, right, on like the X Factor or something, like, yeah, as a white person, it's probably. I
mean, there's a reason Eminem doesn't use the N-word, right?
Yeah. So that's fine. Like, I agree with that. Like, I'm not debating that, but I just think, like, there's going to be some, moderation. Like, and I do think this is like, the reason I say is like, this is game like elites play with one another, is that if you, like, the people who say, like, I'm offended that you've said this word, saying about how bad this word is, the people who are going to stand up and say, I'm deeply offended by that, those are the people who are looking for traps for people. Like, these are not the people who genuinely have had hardship and they're really losing sleep over the fact that you've said that. Like, these are the people who are like, gotcha, and often, like, they're often white people calling out other white people.
Yeah, but I think this is.
I bet you there's not a single black person on the board of Netflix that call, in that.
This is a good example, right? Because I think that, like, it's definitely it's like black people are offended when it's just not something you're allowed to do. Let's up the stakes just a little bit. All right. There's two people now in the car. You're both you're not people of color. Does that change? And, you both love rap. You both want to say the N-word along to the lyrics. You're not yelling it out of the window. Does that change the moral calculus for you?
So, look, I think
play the game.
I think that's when it breaks the fourth wall, right? That's where your inner thoughts, it becomes not your inner thoughts anymore, right? So, like I said,
no one's getting hurt though.
I think that's where we've, like, if we're accepting it as a taboo, right? A social norm that we don't, like, cross that boundary, then if you respect that, and maybe, like, that's a socialized behavior, right? So if you took like a society and you like let it develop its own cultural codes or whatever, like, maybe that would emerge as something totally fine, right? But, like, the world we live in, yeah. So I don't know. I wouldn't do it. Maybe the answer isn't whether I think that should be okay or not okay, because, like, that's probably not relevant. But would I do it in that setting? No.
But Andy, you've just said that you would do it by yourself. I understand your intentions. So why don't we get in the car together and both do it?
The reason I wouldn't do it is because of the social norm that you don't do this in front of other people, and no one else would know about it. Whereas in this situation, that's it. Simple as that. I just want to close one loop, because I just said before that there's no black people on the board of Netflix, and just the reason I singled out Netflix was because there was that famous example of a Netflix exec, I think, either losing their job or something because they said the N-word in the context of something to do with, I'm a bit sketchy on the details, but I did just want to fact check that in real time. So I went and typed the Netflix board. Now, I don't think I've got the board.
What was it? Sorry, tell me about the search term. Did you use the word black, or did you?
No, I just said like the Netflix board, right? And I came up with a website. I don't think I have the board, but I have the leadership team, right? Which I think is a reasonable proxy in this context. Now, I'm not gonna like make a visual judgment over like the racial ethnicity background of the people, but I'm having a look and like I'm just like, so
is the name Darnell?
Don't take this as like factual or anything like that. I'm just simply pointing out that I'm having a look and there's probably some people of a diverse ethnic racial background, but in terms of like African Americans, and apologies to any of the Netflix leadership team if I've got this wrong, but there is one. So just to give you an idea, there's how many have we got? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 20 people on this leadership team. And there is one person who visually, and I know that's like a dangerous path to go down, but there's one person who visually looks like they could be African American descent. They might not be African American. They might be Caribbean, British Caribbean. I don't know. But take one guess what the role of this one single, what their role is.
DEI consultant.
So Vice President Inclusion Strategy.
Yeah, I was about to say the VP of Firefighting and Emergency Services, but I held it within myself.
So anyway, I think we should pivot from. This is like one of these topics that is very hard to get right. So I think we'll prevent ourselves from making.
The important thing to take away from the segment is that Andy and Roger do not say the N-word even when they're alone in the car.
But can we talk about some news articles that came up last week? So I read this article and I sent it to you, and I was just interested in it. But look, we've both read it. If you want to check it out, the article is headline: "Swiping right goes very wrong as Andrew Tate's army fakes a left turn," and it's a Sydney Morning Herald article from January 16th by Genevieve Novak. And I'm not going to read the article, but basically the summary is that this particular opinion writer is recounting her experience on Bumble, or at least when she was on Bumble or whatever the dating apps are. And she keeps coming across these men who happen to be right-wing, right? They're right-leaning and they're hiding their right-leaning politics. And she meets them and they seem okay. They seem reasonable until she finds out that there's some right-leaning aspect to them, right? And she feels like they're hiding, like they're pretending to be normal people, but they're monsters in disguise, because that's the only way they could they could connect with someone on a dating app. So of course they're not putting conservative in their Hinge profile. I don't know what Hinge is. It's listed in the article.
Your Snap.
I read it. I just found it very patronizing to begin with. And it was probably the way it started as well, particularly. It says, 2 types of notifications fill me with the same cold dread. News alerts with headlines about the steep rise in conservative values and policy, and those from Bumble begging me to return to its platform and resume swiping into the ether. And recently I began to worry that there's no separating the two. And I just thought what a bizarre thing to say. There's a steep rise. I mean, because we had a conversation like a couple of weeks ago around conservative values, and I think in the context of like how we talked about it, I mean, it's like, well, if people are becoming a little bit more conservative, maybe this is just like this is the course correction in terms of like, let's say the woke agenda kind of going a little bit too far, and it's like the pendulum coming back, and she's sort of reacting to that. And anyway, I don't know. What was your take on it?
She talks about rage baiting, right? And I feel rage baited just reading this article. I think that I want to know, I found myself questioning whether this author knows that writing in this style would provide a sprinkling of emotional MSG that she's depending on to actually get this article noticed, right? And the way that she writes makes a big audience of men, and probably some women, just viscerally angry with her, because she seems like the type of woman where that causes a lot of issues, right? Like the way that she characterizes men and the way that she, vilifies things. So, I mean, even this one where she's got those couples with diametrically opposed views happily coexisting are relics of a long, long bygone era. It's a suggestion I can't shrug off. In times like these, in a city like Melbourne, members of the Young Liberals and Elon Musk fan clubs probably aren't getting all that many matches. I mean, come on. What are we doing here? What are we doing here, right? Like, I think.
Can I just make one point though? Like, let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. Apart from the stripper, the Donald Trump party when we went on election day, like you got to admit, like the Donald Trump, party was pretty accurate to what she's just described.
Look, I actually think you can't say that, because I feel like conservative put it this way. If I kind of had to, and maybe this is reinforcing some of her points, but what's like the new flavor of the month is the conservative man. Like the kind of move to the Yellowstone country conservative, that kind of thing. Like I think that is what's seen as like alpha male, more traditionally masculine. Like I don't think liberal men are having a real big heyday in terms of sexual attraction. Like I don't think they're the ones that are like matching like crazy on these dating apps, right? Like I think it's devoid of that. Now, Andy, do you believe this line of men starting to veer more to the right and women kind of moving more towards the left in general?
I think in general, yeah. I do actually think that's the thing, right? I think, but it's not like the left and right of old. Like, I don't think it's...
No, like culturally left and right, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like pop culture.
I think it's more... And we know this from like voting patterns, like polling and stuff. Like we know that, I mean, not just, obviously the US election, but like we know this from Australian politics as well, that, men are much more conservative than women, at least like in terms of conservative through the conservative parties versus the Labor Party or Greens parties. But yeah, I do think there's a divergence. Like I think for, I don't know what's driving like young men. Like I don't know what they're like, I don't know culturally, like what makes them more, attracted to sort of the strongman sort of persona.
Let me follow it up, right? Because I think that women are leaning more left on certain key issues, on things like bodily autonomy and like feminist causes and things like that. But
I don't think they're leaning left. I think they've always supported that.
Sorry, not leaning. They're aligning to that, right? Which makes perfect sense, right? To me, you don't have to have like a big leap of the imagination of why women care about female issues, right?
That's a principle thing, right, as well.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And now, for men, I think it's a little bit more complex, right? Because I think that especially young men, and the reason why they like aggressive macho figures like Andrew Tate is less about a return to conservative values as we described it a few episodes ago, right? And it's more this idea of getting more of the pie, getting back to being more in control, more empowered, getting having your dollar go further, so to speak, right? Like I don't think it's a return to I don't think there are more Christian men out there. There are more conservative men out there. That's not happening, right? Like I think that's where I think there may be a problem here, right? Because they're diverging, the sexes are diverging, but the men aren't going in a great way in some ways, right? They're being kind of like motivated by more hedonistic values.
Okay, so let's say a basic like stylistic fact we can put on the table is that men are becoming. Let's just talk about young men, right? They're becoming more. We'll call it conservative, but that's just a suitcase term for people who like Andrew Tate, whatever, right? Or Donald Trump, or whatever, Elon Musk, that kind of whole bravado thing. Men are becoming more into that stuff. Women are becoming maybe more sort of in the other direction, right? Let's just put that on the table. So why is that? How do we account for that? I am going to put a theory, and that is that, and there's a few reasons, there's a few sources of this, like where this and how this happened. But men and women, young men and women, are spending less time together. So in men are spending time together, and women are spending time together, and that's, I think, probably technology based. So for men, you've got things like video games, boys playing video games together online, and they're just with other boys, and then they get this like bro culture or whatever because there's nothing to moderate that, right? So there's no, girls don't play, they're not involved. I mean, some are like true, but they're probably more likely to fit into that culture. And you've got then like YouTube, like you watch the kind of YouTube videos that young boys like are into, right? And you hear the way the YouTubers talk, and they're kind of just general bravado, right? They're trying to emulate that. And then for women, it's like social media. It's like they're following whatever the Instagram, and then there's like, or whatever the different social media networks. And then there's like opinions of things and so on. So like when we were younger, like we had like a group of people that we engaged with, and there were, I don't know if it was equal boys and girls, but like there would be certainly groups of young women and young men that might have their kind of groups with their boy group and their girl group, but they'd come together and you'd socialize more. Whereas I don't think they do that as much.
I think that doesn't help, but I don't think it explains what we're seeing. I think that it's much more like nuts and bolts for me. Like actually, when you sit down and you think about things in a more transactional manner, and maybe I'm hesitant to say this because it's a bit fallen out of fashion, but like a power dynamic between the sexes, I think it does make sense the way things are going, right? Like there's no doubt that men are starting to lose value and status in society. And there are structural elements to that as well, that a man's physical strength and privilege is waning in the modern economy, the modern society. The fact that you are on average taller, stronger, than women has much less value nowadays than it used to have. And I think that the structures of the institutions have meant like this really rise and success of women in the workforce, like their entrance, their university rates, how they're performing in education, how the systems are made to cater for that side as well. There's hormonal things in there. So I think that if you look on balance, because of a much needed correction between the sexes, number one, but also the way society has progressed into liberal values, men are getting less share of the wallet in terms of the power dynamic and the privilege. And I think that is true, right? And I'm not saying it's not right or wrong, but I think that has happened.
I can tell you why I don't buy that as strongly is because that phenomenon that you've been talking about has been decades in making. Like female participation in the workforce is literally decades. Like it's some of those.
Yeah, but there's a lead time for it to kind of.
Yeah, but some of those figures around education, again, decades. Like all of those factors are very, very long running and are pretty stable trends, right? They've been pretty stable trends over decades. But this phenomenon that we're talking about, this is just like the last couple, like 2, 3, 4 years, right? Whereas,
No.
well, okay, I say absolutely yes, because do you know what? Like let's say before 2020. So in say the decade from 2010 to 2020, the trajectory was the opposite direction. It was all about men being like more effeminate, right? That was the thing, right? Like that. So this is like a cultural fad. Like it's not like I don't see it as this long running thing, and I think that's got to be aligned more closely to a more contemporary phenomenon, which is why I think some of these like technological factors are at play. Well, I mean, I'm just speculation, of course, but like. Yeah, I just think some of these things around men suddenly realizing, like I need more. My socioeconomic status has been eroded compared to my grandfather and my father, so I need to go and watch Andrew Tate. Like I don't think people are conscious like that. People follow trends. They follow what their friends are doing. I think that actually gives them too much credit, that they're actually thoughtfully doing this or thoughtfully changing it this way.
It's all part of the the levers that are being pulled here, right? Like I think that has something to do with it, more so than I suppose men and women not mixing and being socialized together. In my view, right? Like, but I want to get back to this article though.
Well, okay, just to give like a petri dish of this, right? These kind of behaviors that we're talking about, like they're rife in single-sex private schools. They're rife in that environment. They're less rife in co-ed, co-educational.
I don't think we can say that though.
I think we can, absolutely, 100%. Like
I think that's a stereotype.
No, I don't think it is at all. Like I think when you look at the attitudes of boys, young men who attend single-sex schools, I think they don't learn to have the same respect for women.
No.
I
don't agree with that, because it's the time you spend with your peers of the opposite gender at school
normalizes
in comparison
bad behavior
to how you have influences in your family, whether you have a brother or sister or the strong, like you're not, just because you go to a single sex school doesn't mean you have no socialization.
Let me throw it a different way. Do you think men working on a work site are as respectful to women as men working in an office? Well,
look, I think that is a very funneling question, right? Because I don't think the defining factor of men on an oil rig in the middle of the sea is there's a certain funnel that gets people into that type of employment and job.
It's culture, right? It's culture. You have a microculture. On a work site, you have a microculture. And you can... we were talking about this kind of just like before when we were talking about the N-word, right? If all of your friends are saying the N-word, it makes it a little bit more tolerable for you to say the N-word. And it takes a society, it takes a culture to say, no, hey, that's not okay.
I'm not trying to argue that men on the men on a construction site are way more rough around the edges when speaking to women, but I don't think that's the only factor. Like language.
Of course, with anything, there's like lots of factors at play. But I think
the level of abusers in both parties of a corporate white collar versus a blue collar are the same.
Yeah, probably. But when we're talking about like,
So, these are superficial things, right? Like, I don't think that is at the heart of the problem of what we're talking about.
But if we're talking about like respect, right, or we're talking about like what?
No, because that would then come out in abuse levels.
In this context, in the context of the article, what we're actually talking about is, is Andrew Tate a good guy? Right, sort of thing. If you're someone who kind of, and I think like, I don't know that much about Andrew Tate, but like what I gather is that the people who respect him seem to respect like almost like some sort of form of assertiveness that he's got, or some kind of like he's going to be confident and he's going to like say it how he thinks it is, and then maybe some people also agree with that. Even if that
is the whole alpha male thing.
To me, that's like a cultural thing, because like if you come from a world where you can kind of see that through the lens of like, hey, yeah, that doesn't align with my values and how I see myself and the people that I associate with, you can accept that view and you can actually even start to defend that view. Whereas if you're of a different culture where it's like, oh, actually, nah, this stuff doesn't align, and I think that's what happens, and that's why I go to like, things like video games and things like what are the different social networks like that people are in, and you can have a look at like the video game community, and there's heaps of examples of like, that subculture and the way that they talk very disrespectfully to women, and again about a whole bunch of topics, like everything, not just to women, and that it's like part of the subculture is it's okay to be really offensive. Like that's part of what's accepted in that culture. Like no one's going to come to you and say, "Hey, no, you better not say that. I'm going to, dob you in if you, like I that's just not."
I just
part
think
of that
some
culture.
of these presenting things don't get to the heart of the problem. But I want to bring it back to the actual article. Do you think, because this is something that my alarm bells go off when I read this. Do you think that there are people pretending to be like liberal, bleeding heart liberals or soy boys just so that they can, like do the bait and switch once they've kind of endeared themselves towards their date? Because I find this very hard to believe that this kind of phenomenon is happening.
I also find that hard to believe. Now, I'm going to pick up a favorite word of our liberal friends and say, well, I don't want to gaslight this lady and tell her that she's that she's making it all up. But okay, she's presented this situation, right? That someone like says, oh look, I'm soy boy, I'm liberal, but actually I voted for Donald Trump, kind of thing. I think that's kind of what she's presenting as what's happening. But what I think maybe the purer motivation for this, and maybe like the things that you could imagine her friends and the others talking about, not necessarily a specific example, but the general thrust of it, it's probably something like, she met someone, they had the funny hipster haircut, so they thought they were kind of, oh yeah, must be liberal. They like the same kind of liberal music or bands or whatever. They care about climate change and stuff like that. They seem to be like aligned. They're a member of the, Save the Whales Club at the University of the, wherever they went. And then what happens is it turns out that dude who loves the whales and the greens and all that stuff has an interestingly nuanced position on a topic like abortion, where maybe like, even though they agree with like, yeah, of course it's like women's right, like body autonomy, all that sort of stuff. But there's some aspect of it where they can empathize with why someone might think that it should be subject to some sort of regulation or something like that. So it'll be something like that, where like it probably is like culturally of the left, very clearly, but has some view in some dimension that this person just, oh, see, you that must mean you're Andrew Tate. And much in the same way, like if I'm honest, like 5 years ago, maybe, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe more than 5 years ago, like maybe 8 years ago, when Jordan Peterson was first kicking about, right? Like when he released his book and he had that controversy about the pronoun thing, he had now he's batshit crazy now, like, to be clear. But like,
oh, come on.
Okay, I'm not going to go there. You can if you want, but anyway, I'm going to maintain he's batshit crazy.
You've been so nice to Mr. Peterson. So
he is batshit crazy relative to what he was in, say, 2017, right, where he was much more nuanced. He had some very interesting kind of things to say, and they were new ways of kind of thinking about things, and they weren't off the charts crazy. They were within the realm of like, regular discourse. It's just that they were difficult, controversial, challenging topics, And he was so easily maligned. Like, you could easily say, oh, he's this crazy guy. Now, that was in 2017. He's definitely continued down that trajectory since, and maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was crazy and I just didn't see it at the time. But nonetheless, I felt that the mere fact that I would want to hear his ideas out of curiosity, that somehow I could be portrayed as like some extreme right-wing figure just for being curious,
having
right?
the book in the shelf, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think that's what I would react to here, because like, to me, this article is just saying like, no, there's no place for nuance. There's no place for curiosity. There's no place for you having any other views other than mine. And I don't like that.
I think this is what I was getting back to around what it says about the author, because they're painting this caricature of a woman on a date who is extremely, they've got their list and they're the prize. And the man is really just kind of like the support act. They're trying to just like tick these boxes, fit in, and join the party, right? Like, they're not meant to, and again, it goes back to the power dynamics. They're not meant to challenge any thoughts. They're not there to kind of question or try to like provoke any kind of interrogation to nuance around, female rights or whatever it is. You just sit there, you agree with me, and this is how we get along, right? And if not, on to the next. And I think that some of it's like a pushback against that dynamic as well. That, like you said, there are a lot of things to talk about that you could be done in the right way. And I just think that sometimes culture doesn't set you up as that. And I feel also that we've progressed so quickly that we're trying to run these really progressive, really kind of like heightened offense programs on really old school hardware. Like, I think there is a lot of incongruence into what the sexes find alluring, attractive, exciting, that have nothing to do with what we're taught to believe is acceptable in modern day. And that gets confused all the time, right? Like, I think that it's way more complex than that. And I guess that's why they call it chemistry. But I just think that these kind of things add to the divergence between men and women. They really do. Like, this idea that men are just pretending to be a Harris supporter so that they can get into the pants of liberal women, right? Like, I just don't. I think it's a bad take, and it just adds to the problem.
I think the last thing I want to say on this is just simply that the subset of the dating world, or people looking for partners, right? This is such a, like, the people in this like sphere of this dating pool that's being talked about in the context of this article is like so small. Like think politically. Like, most people don't think politically. They certainly don't. Like, I think most people don't think of themselves as left or right. Like, I think most people just have views about things, and then maybe like at the margin they might say, oh, probably I'm a little bit more left than I'm right, or whatever. I think probably it's unfashionable to consider yourself right-wing. Like, I think that is less fashionable. It's becoming
more and more fashionable, I think, which is what...
Well, among men, but not women, I don't think. So, I just don't think like the amount of people who really truly care about that is all that high. And like, if your sample that you're like assessing the world from is like from, in your office of university educated kind of people, your sample is not representative of the rest of the world.
It's not political, but you know what it is, man? It's this whole ick culture. It's like, I don't want to get political right now, but this dude gives me the ick because, he's obviously likes Andrew Tate, or he's into Joe Rogan, or he likes Jordan Peterson, right? And I'm kind of using that as a scale here.
Well, but it's like, in what way do you like Jordan Peterson? In what way do you listen to Joe Rogan? Like, because
even the fact that he talks about it, right? Like, so if I'm a liberal woman, right, or I align to liberal values, and I go on a date.
Yeah, but I guess my position is most women aren't.
Well, they see themselves maybe as a feminist, right, or part of that kind of modern culture.
Yeah, but they don't hold that as like, I'll let you go, but I don't think that's how most women.
Well, okay, let me position it a different way, right? So they have these things inside of them. Maybe they don't verbalize it, and then the guy comes along and he's talking about what he's been listening to. He brings out some Jordan Peterson. He brings out some Joe Rogan. Like, this really interesting guy. Really, he's talking about like elk and all this kind of stuff. So she's thinking all in the back of her head, how am I going to talk about this guy to my girlfriends, right? Because they will instantly reject. They'll be like, what does this do? Like, he's like likes all this stuff. Well, I do think this, back in the day, you could have a lot more differences between your partners, and it actually would be seen as endearing, or just something that, like, this whole thing about like opposites attract. Where is the room for that anymore, right? Like, that was a very strong tagline kind of when we were younger. The opposites do attract.
But okay, a couple of things. So I think, firstly, this date of this guy talking about Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. Like, this sounds like a really bad date, and she's got good
Sounds
instincts.
like my kind of date. I want to be on that date.
Like, she sounds like she's got really good instincts to want to run 100 miles.
No.
So just let's just put that on the table.
That's not
no,
true.
No, but
man.
this
That
is like a
not
red
true.
flag. Like, this is a
not
red flag. Like, the dude who
not a
on
red
his
flag.
first date wants to bring up Jordan Peterson is the dude you stay away from. Like, I'll call it.
not
Like,
true.
I'll
That
call
is
it. No,
not
no.
true.
That doesn't mean that, like, you can't listen to Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan, but don't bring it up on your first date. Come on, like, this is not it, right? This is not and maybe this is what the article's all about, is saying, like, what I've said. Like, the
article's about someone who doesn't do that. They
yeah,
kinda
well,
hide
that's what I mean. Like, maybe it's like, as a guy, that if you listen to Joe Rogan, well, I'm not in the dating game, but, like, if I was in the dating game, I would not. I mean, I actually don't listen to Joe Rogan, but if I did, I would not say that. I would know that that's probably not the best part of yourself to lead with, right? And, like, people who have an obsessive curiosity with this stuff, I think are quirky, you know, like, they do. It is part of them, right? Whereas I think this can be part of your life, but it doesn't mean this in some ways is no different to, like, a guy who goes on a first date and wants to talk about, like, Formula One racing. Like, it might be an interest. Well, because it's like, it's not. Like, you got to sound out people, figure out what their interests are, and try and work out where you've got some common interests, right? You don't go straight with, like, this is the window into my personality. So
I just don't agree, man, because, like, I think that someone who is passionate about anything, like, that is a plus.
But then be passionate about the ideas. Don't be passionate about the people.
Well, maybe
right?
it's a segue into it, right? Like, the books that you're reading, what you're ingesting, all this stuff. Like, what else do you have to talk about? Like, you know, you weave that in, right?
So there's no issue, like, talking about ideas and, like, talking about concepts and just checking if you've got, like, some intellectual, like, curiosity overlap, right? I think that's fine. Like, that's okay. But I think, yeah, like, if you're leading with, like, very much like you're fanboy of blah, then that's a weird person, right?
Well,
like,
what are the red flags on the female side?
Like, in terms of the equivalent?
Yeah, just tell me. Like, just see what.
Like, I'm into cosplay or something.
I meant more like the you know, the podcast or the commentators. Like, what would you say is like, oh God, like, leave that at the door.
I'm a member of the Socialist Alliance or Alternative or whatever they're called.
But is there, like, this is a good question though. Is there in popular culture?
No,
like,
probably not, because
what about the ultra, like, the hard feminazi ones?
No,
like, you know, the one I'm thinking about, the one that hates marriage.
I just think that those ones are, you know, without, like, painting people with a broad brushstroke. Like, I think if you're into, like, the really extreme end of that spectrum, then you can probably tell that they're, like, super left wing, or they're super, you know, like, you know, revolutionary, you know, in their views. So, like, there's probably other factors, other red flags, right?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just a romantic at heart, Andy, but I think that just makes things more interesting. And actually, like, listening to people who speak passionately about what they care about is a good thing. And I would just hate, and maybe that's why.
All right, let me put a thought experiment. And, you know, I don't, at the risk of making this too personal or too close to home, but, like, if your daughter, let's imagine, like, you had an 18-year-old daughter, right? And she brought home a guy, maybe it was a bit older than her, like, brought home a guy, and let's say he had a MAGA hat on, and he started talking to you about Andrew Tate and how, you're really into Andrew Tate, like, yeah, it's really good, really good sort of stuff. Have you ever heard, you know, he started talking to you like that as another bloke, right? Maybe started saying about, yeah, like, you know, this I've been reading this, you know, what was the Trump plan, the Project 2025. Yeah, like, and there's some really good ideas in there. Yeah, okay. So I guess where I'm going here is, this guy is not an intellectual. He's a culture aligned person. Like, he's getting into not the ideas, he's getting into the culture. And to me, it would be massive. All of those things would be a massive red flag, because this is a signal that this guy is like, he's like, this is almost like the equivalent of, like, modern day religion. Like, he's showing you signs that, like, he's part of a cult, you know, and that to me is, like, the red flag. Not necessarily that he might have some curiosity in some idea, or that someone might have some curiosity in some idea that, let's say, like, as I was saying, that Jordan Peterson might have been talking about 10 years ago, but, like, that the appetite is to be part of a culture, not curiosity in the ideas themselves. Like, wouldn't that worry you as a parent?
Yeah, it would. Like, let's just kind of nip that in the bud. But a more a more aligned equivalent to me is like someone who is like obsessed with cosplay. Because I'm using your example, right? Because I have been to a cosplay festival as a photographer because it's just so crazy. Now, if it had like a deep obsession with cosplay, like they went to all the conventions in Sydney and some they went to a dozen conventions a year, right? They loved it. They filled their time with making costumes and researching how to like do it and all the kind of, they were deep in the culture, like the kind of anime culture and everything like that, right? I wouldn't turn them away.
No, look, of course not. I was sort of saying cosplay in jest.
Or swap culture, like cosplay with a Dungeons and Dragon nerd, or they love the Bathurst, right? They go every year to the Bathurst 1000, right? Like all these kind of things, right? Like all I'm saying is that it's not always so ideological, I think. It's not always so like, I'm a disenfranchised male, and I'm going to follow Andrew Tate down the rabbit hole, right? Like, I think most people can tell Andrew Tate for what he is. I think there is a certain type of fuckboy that he speaks to, and he's saying, well, this is how I get chicks. This is how I play the game. And let's be honest, there is a game to be played because of those things I spoke about earlier around working on old hardware. There is a game to be played, right? Let's not sugarcoat that either. That there are ways you can manipulate the male and female psyche to get what you want, right? And certain types of people are always going to be attracted to that. And that could come from a place of like a power. It could be a place of like, I don't get women, so I want to learn how. Like it can be from all sorts of things, right? And I think those are the more devious and problematic expressions of this culture. But a lot of it is just like, don't vilify hobby people or people who are passionate about
we're not
things.
talking about hobby people. We're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons fans or cosplay fans. We're talking about people who are like, like
you talk about Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson.
Well, you brought up Joe Rogan. I didn't say Joe Rogan.
You said it was red flag.
No, not on its own, not in isolation, but combined with a few other things, right? So not because they listen to Joe Rogan, but because if they identify as someone who listens to Joe Rogan, like it's part of their identity, or they want the world to know about that they listen to Joe Rogan, or that like it for them it's like it's part of the story about who they like. It's like saying, oh, I'm a South supporter.
Let me paint you another scenario. You gave me one. Let me get personal with you. So your son brings back to like a Christmas barbecue one year this woman, and for all intents and purposes, she is like tabula rasa. She could not be more mid. She's got fucking nothing to say. She can't hold a conversation. She seems to have effectively no hobbies other than liking to be in the somewhat medium proximity of your son. And that's it. You try to engage her on this. What do you like? What do you do? Oh, I don't know. Nothing, blah, blah, blah. Just, I like to, hang out, whatever. There's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing from what you can see. Isn't that just as bad? Isn't that worse?
No, it's not worse, because at least, like, I would say that's just like neutral. It's a neutral palette. So there's probably
that's not neutral.
But people are not like that. Like people are not.
Some
like
people
that.
are like that.
No, they're not. Like everyone's got their own thing that makes them tick. Like I don't think there's such a thing as like there's people who are into things and they enjoy their life, and then there's people who just sit there and stare at the wall. Like I don't think that's everyone's got things that they're interested in. How they verbalize it, whether they, how they engage with the rest of the world on it, it's like everyone's different. But like everyone's got things they're into. Like some people like reading, some people, and they're a bit more insular. Like they don't, everyone's different. So I just think in that scenario, like if they weren't going to come to you with like, hey, here's my passion, that wouldn't bother me. That's neutral, right? The fact that they haven't done that's just more a reflection of like how they engage with the rest of the world with their passion. Not that they don't have passion. Whereas I think someone who's like, even the fact that they're open about like MAGA hat, they're open about like they're open about like their thought leaders that they follow, like the fact that they don't have the self-awareness to like manage how they, even if that is, and again, that's the article, right? It's like, this is probably what she's reacting to. She's reacting to the notion that,
well, if he's in America, he's got a 50-50 chance of the father being a MAGA guy. So
yeah, well, there's people like if you are sort of someone who watches these things, like, yeah, don't leave with them on the first date kind of thing. And the fact that
maybe that's a good reason why none of us are in the modern dating pool, because
if you didn't have the self-awareness to know, don't say that, that's a problem in its own right.
But Andy, like, I'm just imagining myself, like, okay, a younger 20-year-old version of myself going on these dates, right? Oh, man, I'm not going to be able to, like, you either like me as I am, questioning your stance on abortion on the first date, or you don't. And like you said, you find your people, right? Like, it's not, and if I'm going to be written off by some serial bumblehound, then so be it.
Yeah, but that's all right. I mean, I guess the maybe this conversation in some ways like revealed it a little bit more. Like, it's like, is it a problem? Maybe to use this example, like, is it a problem that you engage with someone in good faith and you deliberately keep parts of yourself just muted because you don't want people to take it the wrong way? Like, so let's say you are a Joe Rogan listener. Is there anything is it actually deceptive that you don't reveal that you're a Joe Rogan listener on the first date, or maybe even until, maybe a year down the track that you say, oh, I heard this person talk on the Joe Rogan. It's like, did you listen to Joe Rogan? Like, is this whole relationship a lie? Like, is that deceptive? Because I don't think it is. I don't think that is deceptive.
I mean, it's the big things, like common sense prevails, right? Like, whether you like Joe Rogan or, Pearly or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is like the things that affect your life, like whether you want to have kids or not, whether you plan on staying in the country, whether you plan on having a monogamous relationship or an open relationship, whether you've ever been to a P. Diddy party. Like, it's these kind of things, right, that are the key things. Less like this stuff around like, oh, because you like this or like that, it's like music. So it's like, I'm going to reject this man because he listens to Pink, the artist, right? Like, come on. Anyway, for all this grandstanding about this woman, let me be very clear to the audience that men on average can be quite filthy and can be quite opportunistic.
Yeah, when they're left to their own devices, right?
No, I mean, like, and I just think that in the same way, everyone is self-serving in a way, right? Like, the antidote for that is community, is familiarity. It is those kind of things. Yeah,
community.
Right?
That's what I was saying. Culture. Like,
yeah, no, I know.
Get the boys out of the all boys schools.
Yeah, I mean, there's reason there's fewer of this kind of stuff happening in religious communities because it's pretty hard to disrespect women and then show up at Bible study the next week, right? Like, I mean, I just think that some of it is structural.
All right. Well, I think we've solved it.
I think we've somehow both set our standards through this conversation of that I'm willing to accept a cosplay enthusiast, and you're willing to accept what would I say, a vapid vase. No, I don't even know what to say. So when you ask people what they've done on the weekend and they just like they give you nothing, do you think that comes from a place of like they just can't be bothered to tell you, or they really do nothing?
Bit of both. I think the people who can't be bothered to tell you probably the same people who didn't do much as well.
Not that it's a race, but like some kind of passion would be nice. There you go.
All right. Well, we'll solve the next challenge next week.
One dating problem at a time.
All right. Catch you later.